But the more I thought about it, I thought, subhanAllah, I'm not using my dawah as a healing. I might be using it as a stick. We show that we have misunderstood the book of Allah.
Yeah, it reminds me of what I say in my private conversations.
Today's religiosity, I feel, has missed the point. There has been lots and lots of money since the 1960s being spent to slowly and steadily acclimatize people to transhumanism. I don't think our goal should be survival, it should be to thrive, not just to survive.
It's actually a serious problem, Sheikh.
Indeed.
Yeah, a massively serious problem. They don't understand that. Wow.
And that's really what Islam is about. Is helping you.
There's a Turkish saying as well. Kefenin cebi yok. I know it sounds so simple, but these things are so profound. Because you don't know what the hell's going on. It is actually 4D chess. Many of us can't even manage families properly, let alone the state. So just chill out, bruv.
We have become fixated on outward Islam. The dawah needs to recorrect itself.
Welcome to a new episode of On Guard, a podcast by Islam 21C. During this episode, we discussed a Muslim's guide to modernity. The reason we thought this would be a valuable discussion is because many of the new campaigns we are focusing on at Islam 21C are symptoms of the malaise of modernity. To discuss this, we had Shaykh Abu Aaliyah. Shaykh Abu Aaliyah is a sheikh, author, translator and director of the Jawziyah Institute. He has studied the Islamic sciences, theology, law and spirituality with a number of scholars. He, along with his late wife, Ustada Uzma Jung, may Allah have mercy on her, were both an instrumental part of the early dawah work up and down the UK from the mid-1980s. He also has an MA in Islamic studies. The Sheikh has authored a number of books including The Golden Rule of Differing, with the latest being A Muslim's Guide to Modernity. His writings and reflections about spirituality and contemporary issues on Islam and Muslims can be read on his online blog, The Humble Eye. And you can also follow him on his Telegram page. I pray you all benefit and enjoy the podcast. And if you do, please share it with others.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa
Shaykh
barakatuh.
Abu Aaliyah, our beloved Sheikh, how are you?
Alhamdulillah, mashallah.
May Allah bless you for coming. Jazakallah khair.
Likewise, Allah bless you.
So I had a conversation with Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad a few years ago.
Allah bless you.
And he talked to me about, this was in his college. He said, sign your book for me, please. I was like, oh, wow. And he was very humble, as he is. And he was talking about modernity, the impact of modernity on the Adamic nature, the Adamic spirit. And it kind of opened my eyes to a few things. And as part of Islam 21C's transformative campaign-led approach, we are focusing on the kind of products or evil products, if you like, of modernity, like hopelessness and lack of meaning and suicide, guarding innocence, the whole LGBTQ plus movement, feminism. We're trying to advocate the power of a Muslim woman and talking about the homemaker and the mother as the base of civilization, fighting against Zionism and so on and so forth. And there'll be future campaigns that we're going to be focusing on. We're not going to be talking about these today, but we're going to be talking about something maybe more important, because these are the kind of products of modernity. And you have written an amazing book, A Muslim's Guide to Modernity. And it's around 60 essays. And before I start to ask you certain questions and tell the audience that they're going to get free copies and how they could get free copies, I just want to read Yahya Burt's summary of the book, because it is a great summary. You actually said give it a read. I read it, I was like, wow. And he's the research director of Ayan Institute. So he says, obviously you're known as Abu Aaliyah, but also your name is Sarkhil Sharif. And he says, Sarkhil Sharif's 60 wide-ranging essays provide waymarkers for the faithful Muslim adrift in Western modernity. The essays are models of brevity and lucidity, and they chart a sure course through modernity's choppy waters, striking a middle path between tradition and reason, isolation and assimilation, repose and action, and conservation and change. It can be warmly recommended to anyone seeking thoughtful and relevant answers to living authentically as a Muslim today. Wow.
MashaAllah.
Alhamdulillah.
He was very generous with his words, mashallah.
Alhamdulillah. And they're true. They are a representation of the actual state of affairs. So, Sheikh, before I get into the first question, I'd like to say to the audience that we're going to give out 25 free books.
MashaAllah.
How can they get a free book? They have to comment on the YouTube channel. And the best comments, we're going to send them a code. I've spoken to the publishers. And when they put the code into the website, they're going to get a free book.
MashaAllah, that's very novel.
Alhamdulillah.
MashaAllah.
And by the way, brothers and sisters, the comment has to represent the book in some way, what you've learned with regards to the podcast and the conversation that we'll be having now, inshallah. So, Sheikh, first question, and I've written these down. You open the book by describing modernity as humanity trading meaning for power. Do you believe most people today are even aware of what they're giving up?
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, ma ba'd. Trading meaning for power. I mean, first and foremost, I think it's worth being clear from the outset that when we talk about modernity, or when the book talks about modernity, and in this discussion, modernity is not referring to technology and the latest gadgets. Modernity is referring to the philosophical assumptions that the modern world is based upon and has been since the last 350 years, more or less. So modernity is first and foremost philosophical before it is practical or technological or even scientific. With that out of the way, the question about are most people aware? I'm guessing, because I don't know for sure, I'm guessing that we as human beings, not just we as Muslims, but we as human beings tend not to have a bird's eye view of things. It's not human nature to have a bird's eye view of the big things in life and the big happenings. We tend to be short-termist by nature, and we have to really go against the grain of just what it is to be humans, to be long-termists, to be macro thinkers rather than micro thinkers. Otherwise, it's the nitty-gritty practicalities that we're concerned with. In that sense, I suspect most of us wouldn't be aware of what we've traded. I think if we were born in the kind of, what do they call the generation? So from the post-war, they're kind of baby boomers. Mm-hmm. And then by mid-1960s, which is kind of my generation, we're kind of, I think we're Generation X. And then you have the millennials. I think somewhere between baby boomers who are still around, through my generation, up until the millennials, there is a possibility that if we think hard enough, or if we've grown old enough, we can look back and we can sit back and say, we now have X, very good, but we've traded, or we've lost something in return for this good thing. Mm. But for most people, I suspect they're not aware what they have lost simply because they may not have been around when the thing that has most preciously been lost, they weren't there. So most people, two things about meaning. One, you'd have to live in a more meaningful age when life, even here in the West, life was more than just being a consumer. 1970s Britain had more meaning. There was a sense of community. There was still a kind of religious spirit, even if Anglicanism and the kind of Protestant faith was rapidly diminishing. But there was still a sense of a meaning beyond my life as an individual or individualism. But by the time we come into the mid-80s and onwards, the Americanization of British culture ensures that meaning is rapidly kind of lost. Once you kind of buy into the fact that, you know, it's all about kind of, as the saying used to go, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, it's all about just enjoying life and consuming and shopping, you lose the whole idea of what is it to mean, to have meaning, to have purpose. So I don't think a lot of people think about that, but let's just take, say, Christians or traditional Jews or let alone Muslims who do have an idea of meaning, and there are others beyond them. If you're young, like, you know, if you're born like in the last 20, 25 years, and so you're native to all this technological culture and whatever, you probably don't realize how life was 30, 40 years ago, 20, 30 years ago, to even realize that we've lost meaning. In fact, meaninglessness is almost the default philosophy of our culture as a whole. The world, the universe came here through the Big Bang by just a cosmic fluke. Nothing was purposed. Nothing is pre-planned. Everything just happened randomly. If that's the narrative that most people do kind of lean towards, if not grasp as a creed, as a aqidah, then life is meaningless. And the only meaning that there is what we make of it. And so you have these existentialist writers, you know, back in the early 20th century, Albert Camus and all these other people. They're saying, look, you know, life is absurd. You know, we're a small planet in a big universe, specks on this planet. We're insignificant, big universe, waste of space. Life is absurd. If you think about that, suicide, existential angst, despair, psychological crippling, don't think about that. Enjoy yourself. Live life for every moment. Be hedonistic. And that's what many of these existentialists wrote about, that we need to make our own meaning up. And so young people today, I suspect, barring the exceptions, probably don't realize meaning has been lost. They just assume, like we all would have assumed, things have always been as they are. Allah knows. Allah knows best.
I think an interesting way to summarize what you just said is modernity has replaced ultimate meaning with a kind of self-imposed meaning, just like children when they play in a playground and they play cops and robbers. So it's like pretending to have meaning.
Indeed, indeed.
Which is quite vacuous, Sheikh.
It is. But when you don't have, I mean, from a theological point of view, absolutely, but just from the human narrative, when people don't have meaning, I mean, this was already acknowledged, as I said, by early philosophers in the 20th century. They understood that if there isn't meaning, ultimate meaning, people will flounder in their own despair. And they were beginning to see suicide become more of a phenomena than it had ever been. And angst, born of existential angst, not your clinical angst, but angst that, wow, I'm just part of a big cosmic fluke. There's nothing more to life and I'm going to die. Is that it? End of. So they said, look, you know, if we don't create fictional meaning, because it is a theological fiction, we're just going to have living corpses. So in one sense, once you understand where they're coming from, you think, okay, well, what else could they do? For us, who we've got the healing balm of Tawheed. Tawheed is the therapy. It's the healing for life. It then reminds us that it's not about me wagging my finger at them and you know, you're existentially lost and so on and so forth. And what kind of life is this? It's having pity on the victims of modernity and the monoculture. having that rahmah, because the souls have been shriveled and they don't realize it. So how can we restore vitality and life to human souls? Well, it is the Adamic project, as Shaykh Abdul Hakim Murad is speaking to you about. And I remember back in 1998, 1997, 98, when I first read that term in the context by him, I mean, first and foremost, I didn't really understand what it meant. And in the context of the overall article, it was even more puzzling. But the more I thought about it, I thought, subhanAllah, I feel personally, I'm not using my dawah as a healing. I might be using it as a stick.
Mm.
And it was the first time I remember consciously thinking, what is my dawah, my personal dawah really about? And it was a time for me to kind of change. I remember it was like late 90s. I don't like to use the word ideologically, but kind of spiritually, theologically, it helped me really rethink my ideas and connect myself to traditional Islam and traditional scholarship.
You mentioned the existentialist, which is very interesting. One of the most pessimistic ones, I think his name was Arthur Schopenhauer.
Yeah, absolutely, Schopenhauer, absolutely.
He's
the father. He's considered the father.
I cried when I read some of his stuff.
So,
like he was talking about, and you've articulated it in a very concise and profound way. He said he rather the world never existed, and he tried to almost justify suicide.
absolutely.
Because you didn't choose your death. You didn't choose your birth, but you could choose your death.
Absolutely.
It's insane. I think they even articulated that it was one of the greatest forms of freedom.
Absolutely. In fact, they do. They do.
It's insane.
Absolutely. So if someone has the time to read Albert Camus' Outsider, it's a translation from the French. He wrote in French. It's a really slim volume. You could read it on a long train journey, maybe. Okay. I remember when I read this slim volume, The Outsider, it was just so depressing. And one couldn't imagine how such a slim book could lead to so much depression. And it made me think that if this is what some human souls harbor, this is not something to be gleeful about. From the point of Tawheed, of Abrahamic monotheism, it's something to be really sad about, because it is the greatest tragedy in the Adamic story that you have people like this. Never in human history have we had this en masse. Even polytheists, idolaters, they have an overarching right. There is a supreme power or supreme powers. There is something beyond us. The Greeks had it. The Persians had it. The Romans had it. The Jews, the Christians, everybody's had it in different ways. The Chinese had it. That there is something beyond us. But the modern world comes along and says, no, it's all materialism. It's all naturalism. What you can touch is what there is, nothing beyond. And then they have to have a philosophy that helps human beings cope. We are now humanity in our coping stage. And this, I can't think of a better word, and it might sound harsh, and perhaps it is overly harsh, but this kind of virus contagion has caught on to the rest of the world, and the people of Abrahamic monotheism need to take responsibility of healing.
So can you have in modernity a practicing Muslim, someone who does the 5 pillars, and also be affected by the sense of meaninglessness, or that they act as if things don't have ultimate meaning?
If the few people that I've come across over the decades is anything to go by, meaning if these anecdotal encounters that I've had, at least, reflects anything, then unfortunately I think the answer is yes. It does seem quite counterintuitive. How can someone who is a Muslim, who has Iman, faith, in Allah, the hereafter, and Allah's active involvement on earth in our life as we speak, how can they also have an idea or a sense of meaninglessness? I'm not saying that such Muslims aren't Muslims. No, it's that they have that conceptual belief that every Muslim is required to have. But at the practical day-to-day level, because we're porous creatures, it's not that merely because I'm a Muslim, I'm somehow shielded from everything bad or all false un-Islamic ideologies. No, the nature of human beings is that we're porous. We get influenced even when we don't realize it. Okay.
Second, ideological osmosis.
Absolutely. I remember from something from a semi-permeable membrane to something. I remember that from my old kind of 1980s biology. And we have kind of Dr. Salman off camera who can kind of speak more about that. But we are porous creatures, and ideas do filter into us. So at the practical level, there are some people who their belief might waver or is wavering, because it's hard to avoid. We might say, okay, I'm not going to listen to any philosophical talk. Fine. But then I turn on the TV, I surf the net, I pick up a magazine, I'm in just casual banter conversation at work. The ideas are there. I'm watching something as innocent as Star Trek. Okay. But there are philosophical ideas that come through that. In one episode, maybe not harmful. A few episodes, I might have subconsciously bought into some of those ideas. Maybe not such that I'm a flag carrier, but it's kind of filtered. There's a few drops of that idea. So it is important that we have, as Muslims, a living connection to the Quran, not to be scholars, not even to be theologians, just to understand the basic message, and not the message of I must pray 5 times a day, and the message that there is God, Allah, that He is active now. He's not the creator. He created and somehow stopped somewhere. He's creating now. He acts now. Okay, and even though we, theologically, we don't believe Allah acts in time and space in the sense that we corporeal human beings do, but He acts now. And if we remember that life has purpose, meaning, direction. In fact, everything has purpose, meaning, direction. Even if we don't know the finer details, then alhamdulillah, that's a type of inoculation, but we just need to be reminded of it. Because one of the, as you well know, and we've kind of discussed this in one of our podcasts, I remember one of the reasons why the Quran describes human beings as insan is they say insan, from the root word etymologically, it either comes from nisyan, forgetfulness, or uns, being sociable and familiar. And in fact, because they're not mutually exclusive, both can apply. But insan, man is insan because of nisyan, forgetfulness. And Quran or revelation is a dhikr, reminder, because man forgets, so God reminds. And so we need to have that constant connection with the Book of Allah. So the short answer to your question, can that happen? I think to some degree it can happen. That Muslim faith can be quite weak and fragile and can then take on board some of these ideas. But there is still hope, because we can always go back to what is true.
No, I
Allah knows.
echo that. It's good that you said that, since you've got more experience. So I could anchor off that now.
Alhamdulillah.
I agree. I think there's a bit of a mixed bag. So you'll have people maybe practicing the religion, but from a kind of cultural,
Indeed.
ethnocentric perspective.
Indeed.
But things that give them real meaning is actually going on holidays, buying things,
Indeed.
looking good. And maybe it's a bit of both, and it's one of the challenges of modernity. So this leads to the second.
Sorry, so therefore I think that short answer of yours, I think, has expressed it far better than my kind of 10-minute waffle there.
No, not really, because it takes, the great the great chefs. It might take them 20 years to come up with the greatest recipe. It will take them 20 minutes to teach the disciple. Yeah. So
Allah bless you.
and there's
Kind
more
words.
meaning in the 20 years, right? Like I raised this at Cambridge University. I said to some guys, which echoes what we're saying about meaning. I actually want your thoughts on this. So I said to them, if you had a movie, halal, yeah, great movie, meaning everything is the same, narrative, actors, actresses, everything, yeah, and you have two versions of it, identical in every way. One was made by AI, and one was done by humans. Which one would you rather watch? Now, intuitively, I'm like, I want to watch one made by humans. It took time. There's, it's grounded in something.
And probably the heart has been poured into it at some level.
You know what one of the students said? I don't care.
Subhanallah.
And that for me is a massive, massive issue.
Eye opener. It's an eye opener though.
Because for them, it's about utility now.
Subhanallah.
It's not about meaning, anything grounded. It's about, does it fulfill my desires?
Subhanallah.
So modernity really, in some way, especially from the existentialist perspective, because they say, I am the giver of meaning, yeah? So what they're basically saying is this. They're moving away from La ilaha illallah to La ilaha illa ana.
Subhanallah.
It's mad, isn't it?
Subhanallah.
There is no deity worthy of worship but Allah. Now they're saying there is no deity worthy of worship except me.
Subhanallah.
So, second question. Well, there was, fifth question, but the second main question.
Could I add 2 points?
No, of course, absolutely.
So, there is an essay in the book, the 51st essay, Existential Angst and the Modern World's Crisis of Meaning. And people can read that essay. It's not a very long essay, Existential Angst and the Modern World's Crisis of Meaning. But one of the two, there are two pieces of poetry, one very old and one the last 200-300 years, it's more recent, that help us remember and how, as Muslims, we're supposed to see the world. So one of them is really classical, and students of knowledge, let alone seasoned scholars and ulama, will know this. So one of the early Arab poets, he said, and I'm not quite sure if this Arab poet is pre-Islam, I'm not quite sure, or just within the first 2 centuries of Islam, Ibn al-Atahiyya, anyway. He says, فَيَا عَجَبًا كَيْفَ يُؤْسِي الْإِلَهُ أَمْ كَيْفَ يَجْهِدُ جَاهِدَهُ فَفِي كُلِّ شَيْءٍ لَهُ آيَةٌ تَدُلُّ عَلَىٰ أَنَّهُ وَاحِدٌ. Oh wonder, how can the deity be rejected, or by the denier be denied, while in everything there is a sign by which his oneness is testified. Right? And that kind of reminds us as Muslims that everything has meaning to us.
Wow.
Life has meaning, death has meaning, illness has meaning, marriage has meaning, divorce has meaning. The various kinds of animals and fish in the ocean and life above us has meaning. Everything is invested with meaning, and all of that meaning also points to Allah.
SubhanAllah.
Okay. The other one is one of the great Moroccan spiritual masters of maybe 200 or less, 200 years ago. When I came across this like a decade ago, I was just completely awestruck with it, because it's just so إِنَّمَا الْكَوْنُ مَعَانٍ قَائِمَةٍ بِالصُّورِ كُلُّ مَنْ يُدْرِكُ هَذَا كَانَ مِنْ أَهْلِ الْعِبْرِ. Indeed, existence is meanings set up in forms. Any who grasp this are from the people of discernment.
Wow.
And that's really what Islam is about, is helping human beings to see meaning in their life, and then ultimate meaning. We need to be the Ahlul Ibr, because we see that the Kawn is ma'anin qa'imatin bisur. It's meaning set up in outward forms.
That is very beautiful.
Subhanallah.
That is very, very beautiful.
It's also tells you how well sometimes spirituality can encapsulate the reality of theology.
That's actually true. My mum is Greek Cypriot. My dad's from mainland Greece, and when I went to Cyprus with my mum, and hang around with my auntie, quite close with my auntie. And there are Cypriot proverbs, right? And she said something quite fascinating. Obviously, they come from a Christian tradition, but she said people used to fast a few days before they come up with the proverbs. Yeah.
Subhanallah.
And I don't know why this just came into my mind, because even in other traditions, like the Cypriot tradition, the Christian Cypriot tradition, etc., they come with some very deep stuff, and it just came to my mind for some reason.
Indeed.
And there is a Cypriot saying that says, and I try and say it in the Cypriot dialect, obvious nene milise ton thapsane zondano, which means whoever hasn't spoken has been buried alive. Yeah, I thought that was quite
Subhanallah.
deep, actually. Yeah,
Subhanallah. But then, to be honest,
yeah.
the Greek tradition, you know, not just talking about Eastern Christianity, Greek tradition,
Mm.
but before that, philosophical tradition, it's kind of like second to none in the world, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it's created up some problems, but
And-
yeah, absolutely.
And many of the Greek philosophers weren't hedonists, but they were people who had, in their own sense, very spiritual lives.
Well, like Socrates, isn't it?
Socrates,
One
yeah,
would argue
you know,
that he believed in one God, and
no. So I'm not talking about theologically. I'm talking about that they would understand that training the soul
oh, yeah, absolutely.
and withholding from frivolity and those kind of things are things that we need to do because it helps us grow into what we are.
Like Aristotelian ethics.
Ethics,
Yeah,
absolutely,
absolutely.
absolutely.
And there's a Turkish saying as well. I say it to the Turks a lot. Kefenin cebi yok, which echoes some of the meaning stuff. Kefenin cebi yok. In your shrouds, there are no pockets. I know it sounds so simple, but these things are so profound. Sometimes you get the best wisdom from like popular, like, you know, amongst the masses that think about things. It's so true. Your shrouds have no pockets. Subhanallah. So, second main question. You speak about the juggernaut of modernity, and you actually explained to me what juggernaut means. I thought it was a big boat or something, but you explained it's a massive vehicle, right? So you talk about the juggernaut of modernity. So modernity is this massive vehicle. So how could Muslims build a vehicle to survive the juggernaut, and what would it look like?
So obviously this is not a theological answer or a fatwa of any sort, because it's quite a subjective, artistic kind of answer. It would seem to me, and Allah knows best, that because Islam sees itself as Deenul Fitra, the religion of kind of the innate human nature, that we wouldn't build a juggernaut. A juggernaut, a big massive lorry or a truck, has that idea of modernity and steel and pollution and noise, and it's all the kind of things that you kind of are kind of spiritual pollutants. I would imagine that we wouldn't build a juggernaut as much as, to use a classical scholarly phrase, Safinatun Najat, to build an ark of salvation.
Nice.
Kind of a little bit out of timber, a little bit more natural, but does the job. But as you mentioned before, modernity is a juggernaut, and it's going one way, and people, whether it's Muslims or even other people who have disagreed with modernity over the decades, over even the last century, have found that if they go against modernity hardcore, I mean, you're just smacking your head into a really seriously big, heavy, fast-moving juggernaut, and that doesn't really seem to be the wise way. And we needn't repeat the folly and the mistakes of people before us. But Safinatun Najat, the Ark of Salvation, there's a phrase in one particular hadith, but the hadith has some discussion about its authenticity. It's probably what we want. And what would be that Ark of Salvation? Well, at the theoretical level, we believe it to be the Quran, the Sunnah, and the Ijma, the scholarly consensus. These are the three infallible fundamentals. In practice, it would involve a lot of things. I think I've got a note here to read the second article of this. So I'm going to try to do that.
Of course.
The juggernaut of modernity, kind of, that makes sense. Page 27. If anyone is kind of watching the video and wants to follow this, so it's the second article, page 27. I think I have a few lines there that I would like to read. Right, so Islam is an inherently conservative tradition in that a cardinal tenet of this tradition is to conserve and preserve revealed truths. Pivotal to this preservation are the ulama, or religious scholars. One hadith says, this knowledge will be carried by the trustworthy ones of each generation. They will rid it of the distortions of the extremists, the false claims of the liars, and the misinterpretations of the ignorant. It's a sound hadith. But such conservatism can be a double-edged sword. For although it may be able to preserve what is essential or precious, or being open, forward-thinking and exclusive, it also has the potential for being closed, highly sectarian and exclusive. And regrettably, a few of the more ultra-conservative ulama, or scholars, for want of a better or fairer description, tend to characterize this narrowness only too well. Now, I want to add, this was written in 2012. And I remember writing this from an earlier article that I wrote in 2010. So we're talking about 12, 13 years have gone past, and things have greatly improved, I think, at least for the Muslims in this country. It's not to say there aren't issues, but our conservatism is still there, alhamdulillah, that we're conserving revealed, or trying to conserve revealed truths. But we also understand that the Sharia allows us to tweak some things, okay, through our fiqh and through the foundations of the usul al-fiqh. And so it doesn't always have to be so stagnant, but that requires a deep theological and juristic mind to determine what can be tweaked, how and where and how much. So if we bear that in mind, we need to produce those type of scholars and thinkers who can gel revealed truths with modern life, so that we as Muslims can not just survive. I don't think our goal should be survival. It should be to thrive, not just to survive. Why? Because the healing of Tawheed, the healing of Abrahamic monotheism, was never meant to be kept in my cupboard. As Muslims, there it is, and we show it to people in our jar. Look, I'll open it up. No, it's meant to be shared with everybody. Okay, our religion, our deen is not for people living in caves. In fact, the Quran says, never did we send a messenger except from the people of the towns or people of the cities. Okay, for sure, some of the prophets headed for the hills on occasions. Okay, but that was a means to the greater goal, either to flee persecution for a time being. But the idea was they were people of towns, of urban life, because Tawheed, Abrahamic monotheism, is for urban life. We need to create ulama, thinkers who can help gel this and arrive at these kind of goals. We need institutions. We now do have individual organizations and individuals within those organizations who are committing their whole lives to reaching out to others in dawah. They must be supported. Every Muslim in the UK, every Muslim living outside of majority Muslim countries as minority communities wherever in the world, has a duty of dawah. Most Muslims, it's better for most Muslims not to try to do dawah with their mouths, because we're not articulate enough. We don't know how to answer some of the objections non-Muslims have, and many non-Muslims come with either heavy baggage or really deep philosophical conundrums that the average Muslim, we don't have a clue. But there are individuals, alhamdulillah, Allah bless you and increase in goodness, and institutions. If I can't do dawah through speech, and perhaps I shouldn't even attempt to, let me do dawah through two things: my character and my support of those institutions and individuals who can and are doing that. Otherwise, I might find that on the Day of Judgment, I'm pulled up for not fulfilling a fard, an obligation upon me.
So what I'm getting from your answer here about the juggernaut and the vehicle, the ark of salvation, is that we need to have religiously trained ulama, and we need to have ulama who are able to deal with the trends and the issues of modernity, and we need to do dawah, support dawah in some way.
Absolutely.
So this links to my third question, which we could connect it to the question concerning the ulama. So you emphasize in the book the need for Muslims to be intelligent and informed in their faith. I want you to connect this to the ulama. So how do we make or help the ulama? Because you address this elsewhere as well. How do we get the ulama to be able to address modernity in an effective way? And how do we get Muslims to be more informed in their faith? And I'll repeat this again just in case you forget. What is the most common misunderstanding that Muslims have about Islam, Iman, faith? So there's 3 kind of points here. So how do we get, because addressing this juggernaut is the ulama. The ulama have to be able to deal with modernity. We also have to have dawah and do dawah and support dawah. And the ulama have to be able to apply their ilm in a modern sense to be able to address this issue. And Muslims need to be informed about their faith. And connected to that is, well, what's the greatest misunderstanding or the most common misunderstanding that they have?
So it's been about since the mid-80s, but let's just say from the mid-90s practically. So about 35 odd years since I've Allah's allowed me to rub shoulders with some serious sheikhs and scholars from a variety of places around the world and from a variety of kind of traditions and methodologies. So I don't personally buy into that kind of generic populist thing that, oh, we don't have proper scholars today. I think that is not only an insult, but it comes from people who probably haven't spent time academically with any serious scholar to realize. However, having said that, there has always been a concern, even amongst the scholarly class, that, and I'm talking about for over 100 years, how do we keep up with this thing called modernity? The initial reaction of Muslim scholars was to think that modernity, really the crux of modernity is in its technology and its technological prowess. So perhaps if we modernize our armies and if we industrialize along, say, the same lines as Western Europe or the United States, we too will catch up with the main players. And then they realize that kind of maybe that's not exactly the case. I hope and I believe that such scholars from the early 20th century or the late 19th century will be excused for kind of misjudging the nature of modernity. But for sure, by the 80s, largely due to people from the perennialist movement who attached themselves to Islam, we had a really good body of literature, books, and discourses telling us what traditional patterns of life, including traditional Islamic patterns of life and theology, and how they can and cannot square up with modernity. And that project began from there, and we're kind of well into that now. And so we do have, whether it's especially in Turkey or individuals, as in CMC, Cambridge Muslim College here in England, and elsewhere in the world, we have institutions and individuals who are really doing great jobs, who are really, and there's some really good material out there in Turkish, in Urdu, in Arabic, and obviously in the kind of dominant global language in English. we're now beginning, a consensus is beginning to form slowly and steadily that, yeah, modernity, it's a philosophical thing, no more, no less. And people are now, institutions are now taking steps to get on with the real work. Two things.
On Guard is more than media. It's dawah, defense, and duty. In an age of confusion, we speak truth for the sake of Allah. If you believe this is a cause worthy of reward in this life and the next, then become a guardian. Stand with us and be written among those who strove. Click below to find out more and subscribe to On Guard wherever you get your podcasts. And now, back to the episode.
The rest of us Muslims should know that whilst that work needs to be done, it doesn't need to be done by every scholar. So we still need scholars who can give day-to-day fatwas. We still need scholars who can give us immediately, well, should we have been praying with one line apart in the mosque during COVID? Or should we just be, shoulder to shoulder on the same line? We need fatwas like, for now, because we still need to firefight and we still need to just deal with the practicalities of life. And so trained muftis who understand these issues are always needed. And these are micro issues that require quick thinking and quick answers. I can't wait 10 years for a COVID answer, like 4 years ago. It has to come within the day. But the other type of thinking, the macro thinking, which is where the book like Muslim's Guide to Modernity comes in, it's where people like Shaykh Abdul Hakim Murad comes in. Macro thinking, we need more Muslim scholars to get involved with macro thinking and understanding the philosophical underpinnings of modernity. But that also, unbeknown to many, requires a deep attachment to our spiritual tradition as well, because the theological and spiritual things are so linked. And I gave you an example of that in a spiritual poetry, which speaks about a theological reality.
Absolutely.
And it helps to kind of deepen that understanding in a way that perhaps theological words might not have done. And that, I think, is not happening as fruitful as one might have hoped. It is happening, and there's a lot to be optimistic about. But I'm not quite sure, and it's just my perspective, my window into the world, so I could be wrong. I'm not quite sure it's happening as much. And the other thing is it doesn't help when we keep getting sidetracked, and I mean this in the spirit of the brotherhood of the ummah or sisterhood of the ummah, sidetracked by politics. Politics is always going to be needed and it's always going to be happening. It's just the applications on the desktop that you just have to press and click on. That's fine, but make sure the operating system is as up to date as possible. Others will find that the applications don't run as well. So whilst we can't ignore the applications on the desktop, they have to be there. But actually it's the operating system which is the real crux of the matter. And it's the macro thinking which is our operating system. And I feel that a lot of overemphasis is going, it's historically, there's a big reason, and I don't think I have the ability or the prowess to sum it up in a short discussion. But historically, there's been a great reason why Muslim scholars pronounce upon political things not too much, if at all. I'm not talking about barring a few unfortunate scholars who kind of capitulated to dunya and, being government scholars. We've always had that minority problem historically. And other scholars have always expressed their anger against their fellow scholars of, why are you becoming so worldly? Why are you rubbing shoulders with the palace so much and compromising? But that hasn't been the story of the majority of scholars. That has never been the story of the majority of scholars. And I'm not quite sure it's our story still, except that the modern world with modern Muslim states is you have the official mufti, You have the official Grand Mufti, you have the official Islamic body, and it's official because the state has made it official.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that they're government scholars. It just means the state is involved more than it should be in religious matters. That's one of the oddities of a modern Muslim state. But I feel that a lot of work kind of needs to be done. And ulama who are trained theologically and juristically need to think twice of how much they want to get into headline politics. Why? Because headline politics and on the street activism demands a type of sacrifice, time, and orientation that is not conducive to deep, reflective study, research, macro thinking, connecting the dots. Absolutely not. They each have their own place. But I don't think it will be healthy for Islam and the Muslims in the future if we just think, oh, let's do everything all together and be a jack of all trades. That tends to be then our political outlook tends to be very infantile and pathetic, and our theological, spiritual outlook about what modernity is tends to be infantile or pathetic.
Mm.
And Allah knows best.
So what I'm getting from this is that the ulama, when modernity came, saw modernity not as an ideological worldview problem or philosophical problem, but rather they saw this as a technological or material advancement problem.
So it would appear through the literature.
So what I'm getting from this is, trying to read between the lines and connect the dots, is that in order for the ulama to address modernity effectively, they have to understand modernity as a worldview or a paradigm that says things or has answers to, what is the source and nature of reality. This is known as ontology in philosophy, but forget big words. What is knowledge? What is true? What are the sources of truth? Epistemology. Ethics, what is right? What is wrong? Anthropology, what is the human being? So it's a paradigm, it's a lens, right? So if you have green colored lenses, all you can see is green. Or if you have cracked lenses, you're going to see reality in a skewed way. And modernity has cracked lenses. And what we're saying is Islam has the correct lenses to see reality for what it is. So I get that from you. However,
And you have expressed it beautifully yet again, mashallah.
I'm standing on your shoulders.
Perhaps.
The thing I want to press you on this, Sheikh, which might be even difficult to answer. We don't know. It's a big project. How do we get the ulama to actually get this, especially in the West, and actually have projects and statements and institutions and narratives and campaigns that sees Islam as its own worldview, which obviously they do because they know Tawheed, but to also see modernity as having its own worldview, its cracked lens. Because I see this from a Dawah perspective, not from a scholarly class. That's not my realm. But you'll have people answering questions in the Dawah, assuming the assumptions of modernity, right?
Yes.
You had this with some du'at and some so-called people of ilm, students of knowledge. They adopted an excessively empirical or an empiricist ontology or epistemology because the West does that, modernity does that. We have that in our tradition too, but we also have something else. We have a very liberating type of sources of knowledge. We accept valid testimony, for example. So when the issue of preservation of Quran came about, they just adopted a kind of a false assumption of modernity. And they didn't realize it. You have this in fiqh when it comes to women's issues and gender issues. It's actually a serious problem, Sheikh.
Indeed.
Yeah, massively serious problem. They don't understand that many of the things that they're saying has some assumptions that are not necessarily in line with the Islamic tradition. So I'm not saying everyone's like this because, as you said, and I'm echoing what you just said, lots of great work is happening. People are moving forward. We're not in the same place where we were in 2012, which was the date of that particular essay. But then what do we do though? How do we get people, whether it's du'at, whether it's activists, whether it's ulama, to get them to to get them to be able to understand that effectively and to internalize it?
So if I'm to be perfectly honest, my late wife, Rahmatullah alayhi, sometimes we'd have a discussion on something. She too was someone who was in the dawah early on in the mid 80s or the late 80s, and also schooled in some of the traditional sciences. I used to think, being a person who was a teenager in the early 80s, a child of the 70s and 80s, I used to think it's a man-woman thing, and maybe there are things to do with maleness and femaleness that play a part. But when it came to issues like, I would generally have something very philosophical, theological to say, and my late wife, Rahmatullah, would say, "Okay, but what does that mean practically? How does that change the price of bread?" And I would say, "I don't know." And she would just, I remember the answers would be like that, and it would make me think. I need to kind of think how to. But the reality is, you only have so much limited time, limited energy, limited capacity, like myself. And so really I can only do this much. So that is my poor excuse of saying I probably don't have really practical answers of what to do. I just have small anecdotes that I think we should be aware of, this, that, and the other, but they're just small little things rather than broad sweeping. Here is a plan. I don't have a plan of action for that specific question, and Allah knows best. My small things will be, it is important for scholars and students of knowledge to really work on our own spirituality, because one of the things is you get to a certain level of learning and then you think, generally, I know there's a bit more to learn, but generally I'm okay. And what are you going to tell me that, you're not schooled or anything like that? What do you know? But actually, non-scholars or students of knowledge who are not scholars, they still might have some brilliant things to say. And so for example, I read a booklet about politics and poetry. What's the sister's name? Suhaima Manzoor. Are you aware of her? It's Suhaima Manzoor.
I'm not very good with names.
Okay, so she's a young sister here in the UK. I don't know. She can't be more than mid-20s, or even if that. And she's one book she wrote. It's a slim volume on kind of politics and activism and her thoughts. And I thought, subhanallah, and I really benefited from that book. I doubt if she's a scholar. Okay, I'm pretty sure she's not from her the back page credentials. And it's not as if she's got decades of experience in even activism. But Allah's blessed her with something to say that people do need to pay attention to.
Hikmah.
Yeah, absolutely. Hikmah, yeah. And Allah places that wherever He wills.
Absolutely.
And in order to benefit from other people's wisdoms, we need to kind of our egos need to shrink. Basically, the nafs needs to shrink.
We need humility.
Yeah, absolutely.
Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu said that if you're humble, Allah will give you the gift of humility.
Subhanallah.
Have you ever seen an arrogant person who's wise?
Subhanallah.
You may have the wise guys, but that's like mafioso stuff, yeah? But that's so true. Look at Musa alayhi salam and Khidr.
Subhanallah.
Musa alayhi salam was struggling to be patient.
Subhanallah.
And he was humble because he acknowledged Allah has given you, knowledge that I haven't been given, and I want to get it from you. And at the end, he revealed the hikmah, the wisdoms behind all of this stuff. Absolutely.
So that'd be one quick thing. The other thing is,
but you're giving the answer though, Shaykh. I don't know if you realize.
Oh, right. Okay. So if you can tease out the answer.
The answer is we need to be people of hikmah. We need to be able to apply ilm in a particular context to achieve an Allah-pleasing goal.
Okay. Alhamdulillah.
And that means it would raise the question, well, what is that context? What is modernity? So the minute because remember, if you want to, the Salaf would say there are too many people of ilm, not enough people of hikmah, yeah? So you want to please Allah. You want Allah's word to be the highest. You want to affirm tawheed. We're living in a particular context. This is modernity now. And to have hikmah, you have to be able to apply ilm in that context to achieve that goal. So that means you have to find out what the context is.
So there is there is one hadith that comes to mind, and it is mentioned in the book. Even though one or two contemporary scholars have made it authentic, most classical scholars have considered its chain of narrations, the various chains of narrations, to be shaky. But overall, the meaning is sound. So either it's sound in and of itself, through support and whatever, or it's sound in meaning. And it's a hadith which says, attributed to the Prophet ﷺ, that you're living in an age in which your scholars are many, your ulama are many, and your khutbah, your preachers are few. But then there will come an age in which your preachers are many and your scholars are few. This is authentically reported from the words of Ibn Mas'ud radhiyallahu anhu, so we don't have to kind of worry about, is this a piece of fiction or fabrication? It's not. It's authentic, wise knowledge. And that's one way of saying that we need to be aware of just knowing lots of things about Islam at the kind of fiqh level, this, that, and the other, but the real deep people who can connect us to Allah in the times that we live, they're not going to be many in number by the nature of the age and by the nature of just how knowledge diminishes. My second point, though, from that thing about wisdom is it also helps, I feel, this is probably an exaggerated way of looking at things, and it's from my idiosyncratic life. I don't like it when we just get stuck in the past. You see, we had Ibn Taymiyyah and Fakhruddin Razi and Al-Ghazali and Ibn Hazm and all these other polymaths. We did. But why are we going for the past? Where are our polymaths today? It's a bit like back in the 90s, what I didn't used to like is, Islam gave women the rights to own their property, the rights to inheritance, the rights that Islam gave. And I used to sit there in some of these talks, being part of the talks myself, thinking, but what are we doing for Muslim women today? I mean, the non-Muslim probably is asking, fine, but what are you Muslims doing today? So in the same vein, what are we can harken back to the great polymaths that, some of whom I've mentioned from the scholars. But what about us today? It's clear that the world is far more complex and far more interwoven as a web, as a nexus than it was, 200-300 years ago, let alone, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. And it is also clear to most that really competent fiqh and fatwas can only be as competent in as much as they understand the time and the place and the age and the overall trends. They don't have to be macro thinkers. But real healings, I don't like to use the word solution, but real healings comes by macro thinking and that wisdom to understand how revealed knowledge should be implemented in this age and to what degree. I'll give you one small thing, which is not a new thing. It's scholars have said this in the past, but today's religiosity, I feel, has missed the point. So we find, on the whole, religiosity is do lots and lots of outward things. Alhamdulillah, most preachers and du'at know that they should emphasize the obligations before the non-obligations to people, the fara'id or the wajibat before the mustahabat, the nawafil, the recommended and optional matters. I think most people know that, alhamdulillah. And even from the lay people, they have an idea of this, alhamdulillah. But when it comes to beyond that, it seems to me, so I could be wrong again, but it seems to me from all that I read and listen to over the decades, that people are so obsessed with the way you become religious and the way you deepen your Islam or spirituality is you do more nawafil, more recommendations outwardly. As Ibn Rajab says, that's never been our path from the age of the Sahaba, from the age of the great Imams of the past up until now. The way has been that actually after the fara'id, the inward and out, the obligations of the limbs, the obligations of the tongue, the obligations of the eyes and the ears, after the personal obligations, the way that we deepen our spirituality is by doing some outward recommendations, optional deeds, maybe an option of fasting on Mondays and Thursdays, for example, or maybe a tahajjud there, maybe reading a little bit of Quran there. But after one or two bits of that, most of it is the heart's purification, increasing in tawakkul, increasing in zuhud, increasing in rida, in contentment with Allah, increasing in khashya, in being awe of Allah. Because a little bit of working on the heart is equivalent to loads and loads and loads of outward deeds by consensus of our scholars. So the way that we deepen in our Islam is obligations, a few outward recommendations that you can keep up consistently by your nature. You might be disposed to fasting much more than reading Quran, then do fasting more than Quran. Try not to do both in equal measures when your heart will be in fasting but not in reading Quran, because you know your attention span is about 0.02 seconds. Okay? Or it will be, and Ibn Masud radhiyallahu anhu was like that. When he was asked why didn't he fast as prolific as other Sahaba, he said and he was already a skinny person. He was physically skinny, shins, everything skinny. That's the description we have of him radhiyallahu anhu, a mountain of knowledge, but physically skinny. All right. He says, and Ibn Taymiyyah makes this point. He says that when I fast, I become weak, and when I weak, I can't read the Quran, the Book of Allah, to reflect upon it. He, along with Ibn Abbas, after the Khulafa Rashidun, right, are the two greatest people in understanding the Book of Allah. And the whole of the jurisprudence of the Kufans, the Hanafis in this case, their pedigree starts with the likes of Ibn Mas'ud and Ali radiallahu anhu. Okay, and so he leaves off one option. Why? Because he knows he can't be. It would diminish his other act. We need to, if we're going to spiritually evolve, at least we need to learn some of the wisdoms from our spiritual masters, so that we can grow in a proper way. Otherwise, all that I'm seeing is people think the more I tell others of these more sunnahs, and they're outwardly, somehow that's going to deepen their spirituality. It never has, and it probably never will, except the rare exception. And as they say, al-aziz kal-ma'doom, the rare is like the non-existent.
So this links to reminding you about the third point of this main question, which was, what is the most common misconception Muslims have concerning faith, the deen? And I want to link it to the next question, which is, you talk about that Muslims have to row upstream, yeah, right? Which is tough work. It reminds me of being on those, the sprint machines, the treadmills, and putting it 5-6%, and then sprinting, and you're gritting your teeth, your gums are bleeding.
Rather you than me.
Yeah. So I had to do that for the boxing training. So the issue here is, I want to know, if we're rowing upstream, right? Modernity is coming down. We're rowing upstream. What is the one thing or couple of things that we have to resist? Like, no compromises at all, right? So two things here. What's, in your view, common misunderstanding amongst modern Muslims about the deen, faith, etc.? And when we're rowing upstream, as you advise us to do, when modernity is coming down, what is the one or two or three things that we have to resist? No compromises.
As regards to common misunderstandings, with those who are Muslims but they're not quote unquote observant Muslims or practicing Muslims, I think one of the common misunderstandings that is generally, if I kind of do La ilaha illallah, and maybe if I have intentions to go to Hajj when I'm 40 or 50, hopefully that will kind of cut it. And I think we need to kind of remind people that yes, you're right, La ilaha illallah is the key to paradise, but every key has ridges. And those ridges are the obligatory duties, and we need to at least do the obligatory duties or try to do them. I think that misunderstanding, alhamdulillah, around the world might be lessening for a short period before it becomes worse again, according to the end times narratives. But I think more and more people are waking up to that. If it's practicing Muslims, I think what I have mentioned here seems to be my observation. We have become fixated on outward Islam to the point of an unhealthy obsession, and it's actually coming from top downwards. And that's never been a healthy thing, and it's never been the way of our ulama. Our leading ulama, our leading imams of our blessed tradition have never shepherded the people like that. And I think part of that is not just the Muslim fault, it's a problem of modernity, because modernity always deals with superficial solutions or outward solutions. And I just think that's just part of the time that we live in. And that leads us to the question of, that's part of rowing upstream, is to realize that we need to bring to Allah a sound heart, not necessarily a sound body. And if our hearts aren't sound, we might find our outward actions aren't even accepted. They don't have qubuliyya. May Allah protect us. يَوْمَ لَا يَنْفَعُ مَالٌ وَلَا بَنُونَ إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. That day when neither wealth nor children will benefit anyone except he who comes to Allah with a heart that is sound. And no doubt at all, as per the well-known hadith in Sahih Muslim, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَنْظُرُ إِلَىٰ أَجْسَامِكُمْ وَلَا إِلَىٰ صُوَرِكُمْ وَلَكِنْ يَنْظُرُ إِلَىٰ قُلُوبِكُمْ وَأَعْمَالِكُمْ. Allah doesn't look at your forms and your appearances, but he looks at your hearts and your actions. No doubt actions account. But an outward act of prayer done to the perfection of how an outward act prayer can be performed, with a heart that is full of riyah, for example, showing off, or a heart that is full of ghafla, forgetfulness, so it's absent, then what value does that prayer have? It has very little value, and it might have no value with Allah on the Day of Judgment. Okay, we need to be careful. So whilst outward actions are important, beyond the obligatory outward duties and the obligatory inward duties, we need to focus our tarbiyah on a few outward sunnahs, but mostly inward sunnahs, such that, barring the issue of between the Shafis, for example, and the Hanbalis will say that the Muslim man shaving the beard is tahreem. That's the mu'tamad, that's the authoritative position in the Hanbali school. Whereas it seems to be the mu'tamad position in the Shafi school that it's not haram. So it's possible, following Shafi fiqh, that you could still not have done anything haram and a Muslim man not have a beard. I hope that maybe someone could chase that up from a proper Shafi qualified scholar, but that's what I remember. And my wife was a Shafi, and she was quite seasoned in her Shafi fiqh. So I kind of recall that. But the point being is, barring things like that, our Islam could possibly be such that you wouldn't know that I'm a Muslim, and I could be one of Allah's awliya. Obviously, there would be some outward things, but let's just say I didn't live near a mosque whereby I wasn't praying congregation in the mosque. I was praying congregation at home, for example. Barring the issue, and let's just say this wali happened to be a Shafi, and for some reason he couldn't grow a beard because he's like kind of, I don't know, like he's Caribbean, sometimes Caribbeans, or he's Chinese, sometimes Chinese people can't grow beards, sometimes they can.
American Indian.
Or an American Indian, yeah, absolutely, Native American, for example. You might find that your Islam could still be something very beloved to Allah. The emphasis here is not on giving up outward deeds, and outward deeds are important.
Of course, sure.
The emphasis here is how important inward deeds are, and that it's the inward state of the soul that we bring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the outward follows. And I think there needs to be a redress on that. Not because, the Rand Institute in 2008 brought out something, we need kind of spiritual Sufi Islam, and that can have more truck with us, and they will fall in line with our securitization plans and whatever. No, simply because actually true Tawheed is an inward reality before it's an outward reality. And our ulama have expressed this in untold ways. Ibn al-Qayyim, Ibn Rajab, al-Ghazali, even, one of the great pieces of wisdom anthologies we have is Kitab al-Hikam. Ibn Ata'illah al-Iskandari. Ibn Ata'illah, Maliki jurist, top notch, and then he took to the spiritual path, and then produced phenomenal writing, out of which comes the Hikam al-Ata'iyah, which really every serious student should acquaint themselves with. It's absolutely amazing. The dawah needs to recorrect itself, it seems to me, and Allah knows best.
Okay, you've just opened a massive door there, Sheikh. So I'm going to get back to this because this seems to be one of the crises of modernity, that we've misunderstood the fact that Islam is internal and external and they come together. But before we get into that, I want to focus on this other question, which is, you could see modernity as a set of isms. Because you mentioned before physicalism or naturalism, and in your book you talk about science and revelation, and you talk about the kind of different isms or themes or trends within modernity. Out of all of these kind of disputatious doctrines, if you like, which ism is the most spiritual destructive?
So before I answer that, the last part of your question, rowing upstream, what should not be done? I mean, the idea of rowing upstream, I'd like to say, just in the book, it's from a really lovely passage written by the late Martin Lings, where he speaks about that, once upon a time, when modernity first came, people realized that they needed to row upstream, and then as time went on, they had to row upstream even harder and harder. But then modernity got into full swing, and after a little while, it's human nature that some human beings feel, I'm rowing upstream, but I'm not getting anywhere. In physics, displacement. I may have been rowing for long, but I've only kind of moved 1 centimeter from my point of origin. Right? Okay. And so Shaitan then whispers into you, look, you know what? If you turn the boats the other way around and went with the stream, in a short time you'd cover so much distance. And so Lings said that slowly and steadily the boats started turning one by one to face the way of the current, and they went down, and they said, and then at some point they said, hey, look, join us, we're progressing, we're moving with the current. And it's the nature, because you can see I have moved and I'm moving fast, and you're still kind of almost stationary. But the perceptive heart knows that it's not about how fast you move or how far you move, it's the direction that you move. Muslims are incredibly Qibla orientated, not just Qibla orientated in prayer, Makkah. Okay. Mosques are the best at that. Okay. The mosque committees, 1960s, 1970s mosque committees, God bless them. And the muftis that used to be they were really, like you couldn't go like a hair's breadth. Okay. Like 0.01 nanometers short, and that's it, invalid prayer. But Muslims are Qibla orientated, direction orientated, not just in prayer, but heart wise. The heart must always be directed towards Allah. Okay, and to have that awareness, which is why the word taqwa is the most common theme in the Quran, because it's an awareness, a consciousness. The heart's direction or qibla is Allah Jalla Jalaluhu. So we should, the thing that we need to be careful is to stop rowing, or to think that merely because people are speedily heading downstream, that is a good thing. No, because not everything that is good, not everything that progresses is good. Cancer progresses.
Yes.
But no one would say it's good. In fact, we need to
I'm going
ask.
to quote you on that.
It's in the book. It's in the book as well. In fact, we need to ask, and the book asks the question and explains it from the words of Gay Eaton, the late Gay Eaton. We need to first ask what progress is. And progress, in a nutshell, without reading the book, is anything that brings us closer to the divine reality and in conformity with the divine will is considered progress in Islam. Anything that takes us away from Allah and his loving submission or his obedience is considered anti-progress. And that's not to say that our Muslim countries and states and their economies and their societies shouldn't function better than they're doing, by worldly standards and statistics. Some of them are failed states and whatever. But as you quite rightly pointed out in before our discussion, sometimes you might be statistically a failed state, but you are people full of iman. And so, but still, it doesn't give us an excuse to be a failed state.
For sure.
But all it means is that that's not the ultimate measure of human worth or human greatness. In fact, iman is. We should just remember that. And we should also remember that what is the purpose of the world? The purpose of the world by its nature is ibtila, is trials, tribulations and tests. لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. Allah created life and death that He may test which of you is best in conduct. If we think the world can be utopian in any form or fashion, we fall for the same myth that early 20th century utopian movements fell for, and we show that we have misunderstood the Book of Allah. There is no utopia on this earth. There is trying to work for justice, some stability, but utopia is only Jannah. Okay, anything else outside that cannot be a utopia. Ibtila is the nature of the world, and we should just remember where Allah put us in this world. In Islam, the world is not, the importance of the world is not for what it is, but what it can supply us with. Meaning that it gives us an arena to learn and develop our Adamic potential. Love of Allah, obedience to Him, restraining the ego, patience, service to others, standing up for justice, reliance, tawakkul, fear and hope in Allah, so on and so forth. Okay? And that's why on some occasions, there are occasions where the Prophet ﷺ told people, look, help this needy person. Alleviate whatever difficulty he or she is having. Then there were some occasions, as you'll recall in the sound hadiths, a person came up to the Prophet ﷺ and he or she, I think it's a he had leprosy, and Ya Rasulullah, please, it's a she, please make dua to Allah to cure me. And what does he say? If you wish, I will make the dua. And we know that when the Prophet, when a prophet or when the Prophet ﷺ makes dua, it's accepted, it's qabul, okay, right? If you wish, I can pray to Allah to remove it. Or if you wish, you can have patience, which will be better for you. So she said, Ya Rasulullah, then at least make dua that in that state, in that fit of epilepsy, my clothes then become revealed to reveal my nakedness. But you'd think, hold on a minute, wouldn't the answer be just pray for her cure? Same hadith in Bukhari, blind man comes to the Prophet and same thing. If you wish, I can pray to Allah for you. Why? Because the real goal is to develop the Adamic potential. In this case here, it's rida bil qada, to have contentment with your lot in life and still be connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We Muslims now think that the ultimate end goal is somehow political stability. And though I'm not saying that we Muslims believe in political instability, in fact, it's completely the opposite, which is why khuruj anil hukam, rebellion against a wicked, unjust Muslim ruler is generally considered a no-no, to the degree that there is a reported consensus about the issue. Why? Not because Islam says have ugly rulers, right, and misfits, but because normally it involves anarchy and it involves civil war. And it's better to have a harsh stability than no stability at all.
Yeah, the primacy is on stability.
Indeed. Otherwise, Islam doesn't believe in throwing out the furniture and the furnishings of the room just to have clean walls. It doesn't.
It's interesting you said this, because we were doing an interview with Shaykh Haytham, and he said that the default position is tests.
Indeed.
For people's lives. And I haven't really heard it articulated this way, Jazakallah Shaykh. So tests become a means if we react to those tests or respond to those tests effectively to actually bring out the Adamic potential.
Absolutely. Otherwise, Allah has creatures that glorify Him 24/7.
Yes.
Why would He want this fractured Adamic creature? Because there is a potential in every Adamic person, every human being, to rise higher than the station of angels.
Yes.
But that only comes when the metal is tested.
Yes.
And that can only happen at the human level through trials, tribulations, vicissitudes, fitna, and so on and so forth.
The root word to
purify it. But
so you actually revealed, your scum comes out, who you really are comes out, or you're purified.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the nature of
absolutely.
Test. But one would argue as well, Sheikh, maybe that no one's going to call for utopia. They're almost impossible. Even amongst the Sahaba, there wasn't a utopia. We know the history. However, isn't an act of taqwa to be on the path of commanding the good, forbidding the evil, wanting Allah's deen to be superior, wanting to have, a political or powerful entity that actually can showcase the light of Islam to the world, even if that cannot happen. But pursuing that path, if it's based on righteous intentions, it's based on that, qalbin salim, that sound heart, that they want to do that, that's not a blameworthy set of action, surely.
For sure, let me give the quickest, shortest answer. For sure, that is not only not blameworthy, it's praiseworthy.
Praiseworthy.
Okay. So there's no doubt about it, and a Muslim can't be in any doubt about it. That's the outlines. The quibble comes in the details.
I've asked this because I don't want you to be misunderstood.
Allah bless you. Allah bless you.
Yeah.
So politics is part of life in Islam. Siyasa. We might discuss what the area of siyasa actually is, but let's just keep it general. And having social, political rules over us that govern us, that reflect the dictates of Tawheed and prophetic guidance, is also part of Islam. It just happens to be that part of Islam that doesn't have as many explicit details as, say, the rules for pilgrimage, ablution, prayer, or something like that. But it has guidelines, and that is an obligation. It is a profound mistake from those good people, those few good learned people who are beginning to say that we don't need a caliphate or the Sharia to be the dominant legislation. If they're saying, if by that they mean we can't have a 7th century Meccan Arabia or a 9th century Damascus polity, that's ridiculous, then we would have to agree with them. Okay, but if they're saying no Sharia, that the laws should just be what they are now, kind of liberal, democrat, whatever,
Secular.
Then that's not how they should be for majority Muslim countries. As regards to non-Muslim countries, that's a different story. So let's be clear on that. However, it seems to me, and again, this is my window into the world, so if you feel this is really out of sync with reality, but I do try to make a distinction between anecdotal things and trends. Not every anecdotal episode signifies a trend. And I do believe we're closer to trend than anecdotal here. I think there's some element of confusion amongst the du'at and some of the mashayikh, some of the scholars or sheikhs, students of knowledge, about this. Whilst there is a fringe voice even today around the world, including here in the UK, that seem to be so royalist that every Muslim ruler on the planet today, rather than being unfit for purpose, are like Allah's greatest awliya. I would be surprised if there is a single wali from any ruler for the last 100 years. There might be one or two, who knows. But to be royalist and defend every mistake, and to believe you can't criticize an act of the ruler that is done publicly and widespread, is to go against the Sunnah. To criticize the ruler, there are texts there that don't allow that. And there is a majoritarian understanding that it serves no benefit, because and the texts are alluding to that. But criticizing the public action is allowed, providing it doesn't lead to greater harm. Okay, I mention that because that's a fringe there. The other thing is, there is no politics in Islam, and I think generally most Muslims are aware that that's not quite what Islam says. But what we do find is, in here, just talk about the UK. Why are people talking about we want this land to be a Sharia land, when the common notion of Sharia is penal codes, hudud punishments? If you say Sharia to someone, Muslim or non-Muslim, generally that's the first thing that they have in their mind.
Yes.
If people think a rule of Allah, a penal code of Allah is more important than Allah and His Tawheed, they need to read Seerah and Sunnah again. There seems to me to be no reason whatsoever, except in an academic situation, whereby we need to be calling for the implementation, as they say, of the Sharia. We need to be calling to restoring the remembrance of God into people's hearts who are either largely becoming atheists or are atheists, or indifferent to Allah.
Nihilistic.
Nihilistic, yep. And we need to be calling to basic Abrahamic Tawheed, which then requires for us to say, look, engage that issue of why is there something rather than nothing.
Yeah.
Otherwise, as Ibn Taymiyyah says, and again it's in the book, in the Modernity book, the actual long quote, that the first migrants to Abyssinia, the first Muslim migrants to Abyssinia, some of who died in Abyssinia before they came back 6 or 7 years later to Medina, went to heaven without any Sharia. In fact, the Negus, that particular Negus himself, who isn't even able to proclaim his Islam publicly, let alone other things. And Ibn Taymiyyah says there is also a question about how much was he praying, because he was always watched with attendants and courtiers and whatever, but he goes to paradise. That's not an excuse to not pray. The emphasis here is, in our context, the only justification for living amongst our non-Muslim fellow countrywomen is dawah. And that dawah needs to be to Allah and Tawheed. And we haven't spent enough time on that, or enough clarity on that. And the proof is, atheism has grown in the presence of large increasing populations of Muslims. Atheism has grown.
I mean,
and even if we say it's grown on the back of Anglican Christianity, but it's grown.
I get that. But I think what you said could be summarized with the narration of Aisha radiallahu anha, when she said, if the ahkam were to come first, like don't drink alcohol, don't do that, we would not have listened. But basically the foundational worldview aspects. So I'm mentioning this because you're not negating the fact. There could be, in certain specific cases, that you could talk about minutiae law in a particular context, if the context is relevant, to a particular person, if he's an economist, for example.
Indeed.
And you're giving down to an economist, say, look at the economic values and principles of Islam. What does that say about Allah's Tawheed?
Absolutely.
You could do it that way, but it's all Tawheed centric.
Absolutely.
Good.
Absolutely. And in majority Muslim countries, we would hope that the Syrian government, alhamdulillah, would of course it's had years of harsh atheism. We would hope that something of the beauty of Tawheed and Sunnah will be even more established on the land as it's being established.
It reminds me of what I say in my private conversations, which I try and make my private conversations and public conversations the same. But sometimes they're not.
Which is a good, no, which is a good thing.
Sometimes they're not.
Which is a good thing.
But when I speak to brothers, I don't really speak about rulers at all, like by name. And if you see a tweet I did 10 years ago, I've probably deleted it. And there's a reason for that. It's in my I'm 44 now, right? And
It makes you a sheikh.
Yeah.
So you're not a shab. You're not a
sure.
anymore, you're a
I have a family, right? And I'm thinking to myself, do I manage my family optimally?
Sorry, you do know, just right there, you do look like the president of Syria.
You know what? Someone else has told me that before.
It's just been on my mind for a while now.
Yeah,
So I had to
maybe
get out my
like
system.
twins, who knows?
Inshallah.
So, I say, am I perfect in managing and leading my family? No. And I think the family is a microcosm of state, the macrocosm. That's why I don't talk about anything, because you don't know what the hell's going on. It is actually 4D chess, right? Don't get me wrong. You could talk about policy, actions, public actions, principles, but to like gun down, I like to stay silent because of what you said as well. Now, many brothers may disagree with me, but I think it's more conducive to humility, because we can't even effectively manage our families, and now you want this guy to effectively manage a state. And the state now is so different from the state 100, 200 years ago. There are far more variables in place.
Absolutely.
I'm not saying you should excuse everything, but you just calm down and talk in a probabilistic way. Don't talk about as if you go wahi from Allah that this is what you're saying is absolutely true. And I just find this arrogant in my view. And it's not echoing the heart that Allah wants, I think, in my view, and I could be totally wrong. And I'm known to be like, involved in both camps, do the dawah work, I help with ideological stuff on the frontiers, this, that, and the other, but I have my particular position. Yani, can you manage your family, my brother? And it's very interesting. I just want to, if you don't mind, let's do a tadabbur on the 8th chapter of the Quran, the 73rd verse, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the disbelievers. He says the disbelievers
remind us of the verse.
So it's chapter 8 verse 73. Allah says that the disbelievers are awliya of one another, the guardians, the protectors of one another. And Allah says, if you do not do the same, there will be fitnatun fil ard. There will be fitna on the earth, and there will be fasadun kabirun. There will be great fasad, right? And then Allah mentions about, like, He's indicating the Ansar, Muhajirin, those who fought jihad fi sabilillah, those who followed them after. Then after, what does Allah say? But your family have prior rights over you. I'm thinking to myself, how did Allah subhanahu, not how, but Allah inserts the family in the context of the macro, global struggle, jihad fi sabilillah, protectors of one another, fitna in the world, fasad, this, that, and the other, the muhajirin, the mujahideen, this, that, and the other, and all of a sudden, but your family have prior rights. And that indicates to me there is a kind of necessary connection between what's happening in the family and what's happening globally and around the world. And I just want people to reflect, many of us can't even manage families properly, let alone the state. So just chill out, bruv, as we say. So I don't know what you think on that one, Sheikh. Because I went through the whole Quran in English this year. I hardly read it in Arabic. I wanted to just do my first language, I think it wasn't Greek, it was English. And although my Arabic is not great, but I'm continuing. The point is I wanted to focus on a language that I could really internalize. And I did this. And I want to tell you something which I think is actually very important from the Qalbin Salim perspective, yeah? So this is what I did.
Subhanallah.
Yeah. And it's like,
that was some tadabbur then.
Yeah, it was life-changing. And I came to the conclusion, anyone who reads the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and they still have a massive sense of arrogance, they're in a very dark place.
MashaAllah.
And I also revealed that the Quran, you don't read the Quran reads you.
Subhanallah.
And the whole issue about sacrifice came about. How am I a person of sacrifice, which we really need? Hard work is easy, Sheikh. The most difficult thing is sacrifice. Can I sacrifice my wealth, my my, what people think about me, my life for the sake of Allah. And that you have to have a certain level of spirituality, which is like, and that really kind of disturbed me, I think.
Yeah.
So anyway, I thought I wanted to share that. So question, Sheikh, notwithstanding all the stuff we spoke about so far, what ism amongst the kind of different isms within modernity is the most spiritually or Islamically destructive, and what can we do about it?
From what I recall, section 3 of the book is modernity and its isms.
Yep.
And I address 5 or 6 isms there. There is consumerism, which I call crack consumerism.
Oh wow, you address Islamic feminism.
Feminism.
You are a very brave Sheikh.
What is the what are the other isms?
You have Islam, freedom and liberalism, transhumanism, perennialism and salvific exclusivity.
So perennialism is the last
consumerism
and consumerism. Out of all of those, it does seem to me that consumerism, because it's related more so to hubb al-dunya in a very direct, stark way than the rest of the isms, is the bigger problem. In fact, it might even be said that all these other major problematic isms are offshoots of the hubb al-dunya ism, the love of the world ism, which really is exemplified by today's crack consumerism, today's turbo consumerism. Transhumanism is just the kind of almost logical, I mean, it's illogical from faith, but logical conclusion of the nihilism, the existential angst-ism that starts, 100, 150 years ago, product of modernity. Why? Because one of the things modernity says is that the past is never where the glory is. The future is where the glory lies, whenever that future is. Okay, and part of that trajectory is that has been lots and lots of money since the 1960s being spent to slowly and steadily acclimatize people to transhumanism, which is whereby we might become human beings 2.0, new versions, because we are so embedded with tech, brains linked to computers, computers in brains, all that kind of business. And there's a discussion about that and where Muslims stand with all that. But really, you can probably just still leave that ism. But the whole thing of feminism, the whole, all of this kind of is connected to the love of the world and the uneagerness to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or not even thinking about meeting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it would seem to me, but it's one of those things I think that you can point to any one of them and say that is the bigger problem. It's a bit like saying students of knowledge, especially when we're young, we're all kind of like without the noor of the teacher to guide you, we're quite pathetic, and we think, we just argue for. I just remember this argument one time on the early social media, on the early internet times, and some of the graduates of some, Islamic university and some of the other students, they're all arguing what is the worst of the innovators. Some kind of debate that had no relevance to the outside world, and and there was big, huge arguments, unfriendly as well. Some of them saying it was the Khawarij, it's the Murji'a, no, it's the Jahmiyyah, no, it's the Rafida, no, it's. But in the end, each one of them you can say, and they are the Ahlul Bid'ah worse than the Yahud wa Nasara, and from one perspective, sometimes it's that thing. From another perspective, it's that thing. And more often than not, we human beings talk from perspectives rather than from a bird's eye view, because seeing the wood through the trees is not normally human nature. So when it comes to the isms, if someone says, well, I think feminism is the biggest thing, fine, I get it. I get why someone could say that. It's certainly important. Transhumanism, no, that's the worst thing. Perhaps in the long run it is, because actually transhumanism is taken away from us, away from the Adamic nature that we've been created on. But some people will say, like I'm saying, consumerism, just because it's more about the heart being attached to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Otherwise, perennialism is a big problem, because it's saying that even after Islam and the Quran, there are there are other valid ways to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has in the Quran explicitly said there isn't any more. Yes, there might be ignorance of what Islam is, and so there is a kind of a leeway or a latitude, some amnesty on the Day of Judgment, but that doesn't mean that the way that they chose in their ignorance was valid. It just means that they might have an amnesty for not knowing Islam.
Yeah.
Then that's two different things. So, wallah alim, but for me, it just does seem that even in our dawah, so I think to myself, this is my personal experience, early on in Facebook, when I was trying to come to grips with this particular social media phenomenon, I was on Facebook, I thought, oh, this is handy. And then it said, you have to do this, and if you post regularly, and then monetization, and I didn't know this, and I had to ask someone, am I kind of being blessed here? No, it's a generic thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, what do you have to do? And then I'm listening to this brother explain that this is what you have to do. And I said, so you keep posting and you keep building up your following and whatever, which means then you have to keep posting so that you can build up your following. And I said, oh, right, okay. And he said, but isn't that a good thing? I said, yeah, obviously, if you have more followers and your message can get out. But then what are you posting for?
Mm.
And he stopped, he said, oh, I've never heard anyone say that. I said, well, I would have thought that would have been an obvious thing, because ikhlas is always sincerity, and the motives behind our acts of worship or our seeking closeness to Allah and our Islam is like kind of second to none. And we are in that state whereby we are so tempted to do that. And that is a manifestation of hubb al-dunya. Hubb al-dunya also is a case of, and there's sometimes a fine line between wisdom and hubb al-dunya. And Allah is merciful and He would accept our well-intended mistakes, inshallah. And mistakes that come from a good niyyah, inshallah, are likely to do less damage than mistakes that come from when the soul isn't oriented properly. But it's a mistake nonetheless. Sometimes we're trying to explain Islam to non-Muslims and we actually change the rule. Sometimes you might be in such a climate that if you say the raw truth, even with the greatest wisdom, the backlash is not just to you, but to Islam as a whole could be severe. Maybe I can imagine security states or tougher security states than we have here in the UK. The United States, for example, is an obvious one. Whereby it might be a bit tough to even discuss some of the things that we have here. Otherwise you get, Homeland Security knocking on your door. So one might have to be far more wiser than perhaps I've been here. So that could happen, but when it happens intentionally because you just want to be liked by people, let us wanting to be liked is so that, because liking me will be a means of liking Islam and Allah. Not that I just want to be liked in myself. So I just think that not enough time has been deliberated over our social media engagements and how that plays with our ikhlas, and how that there isn't significant elements of hubb al-dunya. But otherwise, my short answer is I feel consumerism is the bigger ism of all of them, even though all of those isms have their disastrous consequences in one way or the other. And we ask Allah for safety and salam.
I mean, so 2 final questions. So obviously in your book, you go through many things. You may go through God, science and Muslimness, modernity and the melancholy moods, Muslim identity and meaning. You go through liquid modernity, question of politics, challenges of faith, the role of the scholars, modernity and its isms. So as I said, go in the link in the description below. All the comments that we think are great comments, we'll message you with a discount code, and you go to that link, the publishers, and you get a free book. We're going to give out, inshallah, 25 free books, inshallah. So please do that. And please read it. Even though some of these essays are quite concise as well, but they're multi-layered, they're like onions. They won't make you cry out of any pain, but maybe out of existential agitation, yeah. And your soul being provoked to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So 2 things. you said consumerism is the main ism that's the biggest problem, and you also had an argument to say it could be the others, but because there is the kind of detachment of the heart from Allah.
And it's also because when the Prophet ﷺ was asked on numerous times, one or two are very explicit, nations will soon summon each other to attack you as hungry giants swoop down upon a plate of food. They said, Ya Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, is that because that day will be small in number? He said, rather you'll be plenty in number, but you'll be you'll be like the froth or the scum on the ocean waves or in the torrent. And Allah will take the fear of out of the hearts of your enemy and cast into your heart's weakness. They said, Ya Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, what is the weakness? He said, Hubbu dunya wa karahiyat al-maut, love of this world and hatred for dying. The reason why a scholar will jeopardize his or her scholarly integrity, normally to get money, is a hubbu dunya reason. The reason why we may show off in our acts of worship is a hubbu dunya reason. Really, a lot of it will come back down to something to do with the overt love of this world.
Well, this is extremely civilizational as well, because our civilizational problem is not that we need more numbers, we need more quality. Indeed. And you've been focusing on that. Indeed. It's not just the numbers, it's not the actions, it's the ihsan, it's the excellence, it's the quality. And wahan, that feebleness, as you said, is love for dunya and fear of death. There is another hadith that has been attributed to Hasan al-Basri, and he relates the Prophet ﷺ. So he misses a Sahabi. Now, generally speaking, they say you could take it as a Hasan, as a good hadith, because of who he is. And maybe because of the social political environment, he didn't mention which Sahabi it was. Allah knows best. But he mentioned something similar, which he says, I think it's in Tirmidhi, that love for dunya is the root of all evil. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that echoes what you've just said as well. Yeah. The only reason I remember this, I'm not a hadith specialist in any shape or form. My hadith understanding is weak. My hadith sciences is weak. So I don't want people thinking that I've mentioned this as if I'm someone special. I only remember this because I had to check out this hadith because I put it in my book. That's the only reason I remember this particular hadith. So people don't think that I'm actually throwing this out there as a flex. It's not a flex. So I just want to be clear on that.
Could I have a diversion on that point?
Yeah, but I'm going to give you those two last questions though, yeah?
Okay. Yeah. The diversion is one of the issues within contemporary Muslim discourse and scholarship we need to kind of be clear of is, and you can see this more so with Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal and the Hanbali scholarship, is many people today think that if a hadith is not sahih or hasan, is not authentic or sound, it not only cannot be used in Islam, it shouldn't be used, it can't be used in fiqh or anything like that. This actually is not the opinion of any major classical jurist. It's a modern opinion. And I'll give you one example, just so that people can chase up this, and rather than kind of think, oh, what is this speaker saying? He's got, just go and chase up the fact that Imam Ahmad, on one occasion, Abu Aaliyah records it, so does Ibn Rajab in the Tabaqat al-Hanabila. Imam Ahmad is asked about a particular hadith, and he said, in it is such and such a narrator, and he is weak, and the hadith is weak. And he actually explicitly says the hadith is weak, da'if. At some point in time, Imam Ahmad is asked a question, and he gives a fiqh ruling using this hadith, using the hadith that he declared weak. Ibn Rajab, and that doesn't happen once or twice, it happens quite a few times. The Hanbali scholars who know Imam Ahmad's work, like the back of their hand, say that's because Imam Ahmad, as a hadith master, muhaddith, tells it as it is, like a hadith scholar. Hadith contains a break, a cut, a weak narrator is going to not be authentic. Hasan al-Basri, a major tabi'i narrating from the Prophet ﷺ, there's a break in the middle, so there's inqita, it's a mursal, it's hadith mursal. Okay. According to the hadith scholars. But according to the jurists, if a mursal hadith, like the hadith of Al-Hasan, for example, not that particular one that you narrated, but a hadith, or a mildly weak hadith, if it has amal, action upon it, from either the Salaf or a group of the Imams of the Salaf, then that becomes a qarina, a corroborating factor why we can use that hadith in fiqh. So one of the contemporary Hanbali jurists from Iraq today, he makes a really nice point, and he says, look, don't impose, oh, you modern observant Muslims who say, oh, the Imams like Imam Ahmad and Shafi and Abu Hanifa and these people, they had these weak hadith, and the madhab can take weak hadith. He goes, it's true, but they all had a principle. The three that I mentioned, much more than Imam Shafi. Imam Shafi has it lesser in his school, but Malik, Abu Hanifa and Imam Ahmad have it a lot in their school, that the weak hadith or the mursal hadith can be acted upon if there is a qarina in fiqh. So this particular contemporary Hanbali Athari jurist was saying, look, you may want to follow contemporary hadith scholars who are authenticating and weakening hadith, but don't impose that upon the Islamic turath, on our heritage, when we've already taken that into consideration.
And what's interesting, Sheikh, this is not a deviation. This is actually the crisis of modernity.
Absolutely.
Because remember, we said modernity is like a worldview, it's a paradigm. It talks about what we should know, what we shouldn't know, right? What is the source of knowledge? And
so, yeah, epistemologically,
yes,
those who say only the Sahih hadith can be taken in fiqh, and it's a modern thing.
Yeah, so
we've never had that through our classical heritage.
They've been infected by modernity, whereas the pre-modern scholars, they knew from a ilm al-hadith point of view that it was maybe a cut hadith,
but
or
epistemologically there's a qarina, corroborating evidence,
so it was upgraded,
which is the amal of the salaf, or the amal of a group, it's the action of.
So the truth value of that particular hadith becomes increased because they saw everything together.
So let me give you an example of that. So after we buried my late wife, during the burial, after she was buried, and Shaykh Haytham made a dua, and he said some really powerful words. Hafidhullah ta'ala, Allah bless him and increase him in goodness. I just said, I'm going to do the practice of talqeen, instructing the deceased with the kalima, as per the school that I follow, as per the Hanbali school. And I did it really quietly. Normally you can say it loud enough but one, there were a lot of people there, mashallah, and two, I know that this is going to be controversial, and I don't want anything to kick off at my late wife's, whatever. So I really hurried it and did it really quietly, even though when I came home a few days later, when I thought about it, I thought, I wish I'd done it a bit more proper. Anyway, so some days later, a brother came up to me and said, what did you do? I said, so there is a mildly weak hadith in one of the Tabarani collections that says that instructs your deceased with what they said in their life, La ilaha illallah. Ibn al-Qayyim rahmatullah alayh, but you can also find this in other major Hanbali scholars' works. But he says, because the people that I want to reach out to will read Ibn al-Qayyim rahmatullah alayh. He says exactly what other typical Hanbali say. The hadith is known almost by ijma to be mildly weak. They point out where the error lies in what narrator. But Ibn al-Qayyim says, but there has been a continued practice upon talqeen from the age of the Salaf, which validates its practice today. That's one of more than a dozen examples in the Hanbali school, let alone the Hanafi or the Maliki school, and to some degree in the Shafi'i school, of the fact that epistemologically the modern dawah, or the large voice of the modern dawah, are so out of sync with the Torah, with the tradition, with the heritage. And it's really difficult to see how that's going to change, because modernity has this thing that if you shout loud enough, that echo chamber becomes normalized.
No, bless you, Sheikh. So,
Allah knows best.
Two last quick questions. So you said the ism amongst modernity, which is more problematic, is consumerism. You linked it to hubb al-dunya, the love for the dunya. How do we solve that problem? And the last question I had was, give us some words of hope, how to address modernity, and what are some key points you want to talk about to advise the Muslims on how to showcase Islam in a meaningful sense, that you're giving the world the light of Islam by giving the right meaning to people's lives?
Overcoming hubb al-dunya, an overt love of this world more than naturally is there. I mean, of course, like natural love. By natural love, I mean we love to drink something cool on a hot day.
Yes.
We love family, friends. We love ease, so on and so on. Those are natural things that Islam has no problem with. But overt love, clingy love, whereby we love the world so much that it will either make us do haram in pursuit of it, or we leave a clearly established obligation because of it, then in that case the dunya has become a source of sedition or fitna for us, whether in the form of wife, husband, children, money, house, reputation, career, whatever it be. That's the measure. Dunya becomes, worldliness becomes problematic when it diminishes our drive for Allah and the hereafter. And if it causes us to sin, at that time it becomes absolutely problematic. Otherwise, it's problematic in that it diminishes, without being haram, our desire for Allah and the Akhirah, and it competes with the love of our heart's love, bit for Allah, bit for dunya. When we can't be like that, our hearts can't be divided like that. When we love something of the world, it should be for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that obviously is a very high spiritual state that we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us attain. So how to work on that? Generally, I mean, there's no one short answer, but it is by understanding what Allah has said about what Allah has said about the ephemeral nature of the world, and how kind of generally valueless it is in the sight of Allah, and it's a means to an end, and the world is a place not in and of itself. The world is not for what it is, but for what it can allow our potentials to become. Secondly, are we comparing anything to any created thing to Allah's love? We need to focus on Allah's love, so that the light of Allah's love begins to kind of like outshine everything else. Otherwise, we're doing our own selves a disservice to our Adamic natures. Otherwise, it's a matter of rolling up our spiritual sleeves and trying to, as where and when we can, trying to shrink ourselves. And shrinking ourselves, our egos, is a difficult thing today. If we were living in 1970s Britain, for example, and I remember the 70s, even early 1980s, but definitely 1970s, you'd find the British understatement, always pleasantly putting yourself down. You've done this great accomplishment, but it was teamwork. And that was something prophetic that came probably from an earlier time, and it probably has its Christian heritage. Anyway, point being is, it is prophetically grounded somewhere. And then we chose to be the Americanization of our culture, right? That went out the window. But we've kind of all become Americans in that sense. I mean, I'm not saying that there's no good in that country. There's a great good. I mean, it's one of the great modern experiments, the United States of America, and it has some good things and some really disastrous things. And but there's a lot to learn from there. But the point being is, nowadays, even we Muslims, we think, even we practicing Muslims and the sheikhs and scholars and du'at from amongst us, it's about growing our souls rather than shrinking our souls. But the whole of Revelation is teaching us to shrink ourselves, to not leave any vacuum, to do what has to be done, and then step out the limelight so that the glory can be all for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if we want to glory in a glory, Ibn Ata'illah rahmatullah alayhi says, then glory in a glory that never vanishes. His glory. Otherwise, there is no intelligent person should ever glory in a glory that vanishes, that is temporary, because it's then not glory. And so you and I know, Aqidah wise, that Allah is the creator of our acts. Okay. So even when we do huge religious accomplishments of worship and obedience and charity and whatever it be, knowledge, but actually in the end, that's Allah's doing a favor to us, and we don't get into paradise through our deeds alone anyway. And so when we remember these things, it helps us to shrink, and we just see the lives of the Prophet and the Sahaba. How is it that, say, because you mentioned Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu a few times, but when we know authentically he is on his deathbed and he's reciting that couplet, that piece of poetry, which the lady Aisha also recites, "Oh, that I were a blade of grass." Meaning that grass isn't held to account. There's no taklif. There's no accountability for grass. Yeah, but the Prophet said, the Prophet promised him paradise whilst he was walking on earth. And Shaitan and Ibn al-Khattab never takes one valley except Shaitan takes the other valley. Why is this Adamic soul? Why is he on his deathbed? He's weeping, fearful that, oh, that I was a blade of grass, because he knows it's all about divine generosity. It's no more, no less. It's not about, it's never about us, right?
So, how do we reclaim meaning for ourselves and for the wider community? Maybe you could end with some words of hope.
It's kind of, you know me enough by now over the few years that we've kind of really got to know each other. Allah bless you and increase you in goodness. That I feel that my writing, I tend to be comfortable with my writing. I feel that, mashallah, with a few edits here and there, it's kind of done well. I think my speech is generally waffle. So I think if someone listens to this particular podcast and the way that I've attempted to put things across, bearing in mind how in at least on 2 occasions you've said a one-liner or a two-liner that has been more effective than I think my whole 10-minute spiel has. I think the best that I could recommend the audience to, rather than not to lead them with anything, a few words, I would really encourage, not because it's going to somehow profit me, but really I just want us to, all of us, to be able to connect to Allah better and to be more effective as therapists and healers in modernity. Because the world does need healing. It doesn't need any more shouting out. It doesn't need for me to put down another person and tell them how wrong they are, such that I can feel elated about myself. What it needs is we need to be healed. And the Prophet ﷺ was sent precisely with that healing. Sometimes healing is like, it's tough love.
Yes.
There's no doubt about it. But inshallah ta'ala, it's healing though, right? So all I can say is, look, intelligent Islam, we generally, once we've learned that, look, I have to pray and fast and there's some rules of wudu and things like that. If you feel that you have the temperament of character, patience, forbearance, a bit thick skin, and you are articulate by nature. Not every pious human being is articulate, and you are articulate by nature, then maybe, inshallah, connect to institutions like Sapiens, really like yourself, Ustad, okay, because I know you do mentoring and things like that, because you'll probably find that, inshallah, that is the groove in the record, that is the niche that Allah wants for you. But if you're not like that, if you're not thick-skinned, or if you're not articulate, and if you have all those qualities that can make the dawah so cringy, don't jeopardize your salvation, but find your own path to Allah through service to your parents, service to your neighbors, helping the brothers in dawah physically, driving them, supporting them with your wealth, because now you've got a good paying job or whatever, or 101,000 ways of helping and to being righteous. But what we do need in all of this is the shrinking of the self. And what we do need in all of this is language. Of course it's dawah, of course it's tawheed, of course it's sharia, of course it's sunnah, and all the. But actually, when I'm reminded that the Prophet ﷺ and tawheed is healing, it's therapy, it's the soothing for the souls, for the anxious soul, it makes me see myself in a different light, and it makes me look at the world in a different light. I think, alhamdulillah, more of us are becoming relatable as du'at, callers in the West. We're shunning unnecessary foreign embellishments that we don't. Sharia doesn't require us to have, doesn't require me to wear an Indian, Pakistani qameez or a Yemeni shawl. You know, these things can be very, mashallah, you know, when we go for occasions and whatever, mashallah, we might do that. But we need to be relatable, not just the language we speak, but the way we dress, the ideas we communicate. We need to be concerned. And I'll just end with this, really. The book is very thorough. It has a wide sweep, so it's there. But let's try to have some of that prophetic compassion. Modernity, day by day, has victims. The victims are normally struck with existential angst of not understanding what on earth I'm supposed to be doing here on earth, and why does everything seem pointless. My generation has left my children's generation, my youngest is 25, my oldest is 35, with an earth and a planet and a society which is far more unstable, unproductive than what we had in my generation. That's not their fault. The social media age has made the world more angry, and expressing that anger has almost become the default norm. So civility now is a rare commodity, but it's not any one person's fault. And we have things over the horizon, loss of jobs, teachers out of jobs because an AI can do it better, doctors out of jobs because an AI could do it better, so on and so forth. That initially 5 years, 10 years, 20 years is going to be a major upheaval. And in upheaval times, there are scapegoats, there is even more anger. And so we must not forget that our job is not to get caught up in the anger and the rage, but to be level-headed enough to remember that we're meant to be healers through Abrahamic monotheism, through Tawheed. Otherwise, we fail we're not fit for purpose. We fail what we're meant to be here for. So whilst it's important to be aware of those things and to have some knowledge of what people now call futurology, not what technology will have in the future, but how that technology may or may not shape society. That's what futurology is about, rather than predicting tech. Whilst we might be getting into all that, we need to know how to heal our own selves and those immediately around us, and maybe even society as a whole. We ask Allah for tawfiq.
I mean, Jazakallah, Sheikh. May Allah bless you. Jazakallah for coming. Not many people may be aware that relatively recently your beloved wife passed away. I just want everyone to make dua for her and grant her Jannat al-Firdaus, to grant her the highest level of paradise without any reckoning, and to make it easy on you and your entire family. May Allah bless you, Sheikh. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.